creativity, unity, diversity, love that educators put into our work every day and often on weekends. Thank you to our presenters. We have a lot of people here today who are among us who are presenting, and we are the educators. Could you please stand up if you're presenting today? Today we'll be crossing boundaries, sharing ideas, making connections, learning names, getting email addresses, staying in touch, learning new ways to fight back. Most importantly, this isn't really that hard to do. If you're interested in doing something like this at your school, come talk to me. We set these things up. It takes some hard work, but we pull things together, and people come out of the woodwork to present what they're good at these collaborations. So I hope you all get inspired and energized today. But before you do, I have some logistics. Please sign in if you haven't already. After the keynote, there will be 4 workshops. There's 55 different choices that you can make in the agenda, so look through those carefully. Most of them are being held on the 2nd floor that way. So you go out of the auditorium, go down into the hall, 2nd floor. There's a couple on the 1st floor, there's a couple on the 3rd floor. There's one across the parking lot in LaSalle Art Museum. So if you are going to go to LaSalle, there's a link. If you go to the agenda online, there's a hyperlink, a little map telling you how to go across. It's a shortcut to the museum. There is no prior sign up for workshops, so if they do fill up, you're welcome to sit on the floor, or find another workshop. If you find yourself in a workshop that is not quite what you thought it was going to be, not working out for you, you're welcome to leave the workshop and go to another one. So feel free to do that. All right. There's one change: plenary perspective. The workshop Plenary Perspective will be in room 301. So if you're planning to go to that, you go up to the 3rd floor to a lab room. If you are not a school district employee and you want to get on the wireless, you need to use a username and password. And user ID is Central PD. Central PD. And the password is 2016. So user ID is Central PD. Password is 2016. Don't forget to take your lunch break. Around 10:30, we should have some lunch trucks. We have smoking tacos and dump and roll dumpling truck setting up right outside the front door here. Enjoy that. There'll be lots of resource tables up on the 2nd floor as well, so please check those out. So now for the good part, keynote. We invited Dr. Edwin Mayorga to speak today, but also to listen, to open a conversation. Edwin is a parent, educator, scholar, activist. As an instructor in the Department of Educational Studies at Swarthmore College, he has helped, along with his students, to found critical education policy studies. His current project is called Education en Barrios. It's a youth participatory action research project in the Philadelphia area, working with youth in the Philly area. Edwin has fought alongside Teachers for Educational Justice for 11 years as a member of NY CORE, the New York Collective of Radical Educators. Now in the Philly area, he stands with teachers, parents, and community to continue the same struggle to defend and improve public education. Today, as we learn from each other ways to make our teaching more powerful, more relevant, and more inclusive, I'm delighted to have Edwin open the dialogue about the wider environment in which we teach amidst the struggle for racial and economic justice in Philadelphia and around our country. Today we reclaim our professional development and we take ownership of a small piece of the situation we find ourselves in. Next, we start driving the narrative of education and advocate with students and families for our schools. We ask today, with Edwin as educators, what is to be done. Edwin Mayorga, Dr. Edwin Mayorga.
How's everybody doing? Buenos dias. Good morning. Did y'all vote? Okay, make sure you all do. Okay. Because then if you're not voting, then my talk is kind of, yeah. So I encourage you to participate, but also to think about voting as not something that is a kind of one and done deal, but rather a part of a trajectory of what it means to be an engaged person living in advanced society right now. So, and particularly I think as educators, what our role is both in the classroom as well as in the streets and community. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from in talking to you all today. And so I do want to thank, is that the school bell? Yeah, all right. So I should say, so the New York Collective of Radical Educators, where I kind of sharpened my teeth and developed my experience, the end of our mission statement is that the struggle for justice does not end when the school bell rings. So if the bell keeps ringing, we're going to keep going. But I did want to thank the Affiliate Collaborative team, Tom Quinn and folks, for inviting me. I'm humbled and honored as a former classroom teacher and still seeing myself as an educator in higher education, as well as a parent. My favorite time is actually talking with teachers. And it's really not about, I'm going to try to think about, when I was asked to do this, I wanted to think about, well, what is it that I want to do? And part of it is I want to try to squeeze in some actually talking with you all rather than talking at you all, which is, I think, part of perhaps the beauty of Affiliate Collaborative and what I think we can really gain from each other rather than thinking about it as this kind of, I don't know what you all, I mean, down here in Philly, but I mean, PD in my time in New York City schools was an ongoing grind, mind-numbing kind of thing. And so I hope not to reproduce that and hope to engage people in really thinking through some ideas and to also hear from you all. Okay. And I also wanted to thank my honor seminar course students that I'm teaching. I'm teaching a course on urban politics, policy, and education with Philadelphia as our case study. And so we're working with both charter schools and traditional public schools and thinking through some of these questions. So, you know, what are the contradictions and challenges there? So I just wanted to thank them as well. And most importantly, I wanted to honor you all as teachers. I teach a course on teacher lives where we look at the way teachers are narrated in media and policy, you know, the freedom riders, and but we also have like authors like, let's say, Liz Wilson, and really thinking through some of those things. And what I find is that for the most part, teachers have a hard time narrating what their narrating what their lives are like because they're actually busy living it. Doing the good work. So in doing this talk, I want to honor you all and also invite you to take this PD Day as an opportunity to reflect, to take a breath, to be with one another, and to think things through, and to really just, I think about one of the critiques, and I think one of the things that I want to suggest today is that we've lost the joy. Both our students and ourselves in schools and in classrooms. And so I hope you just enjoy this day in just being with one another as professionals and as people committed to education and what I think about as kind of holistic community development. So who am I? Just really quickly, I want to position myself and make sure that it's clear, and thank you, Tom, for the nice introduction. But just to further say that I understand that I'm an outsider. The things that I say about Philadelphia and what I notice are observations of someone who's new here. But I am humbled by the wisdom of teachers and what's happening here and community folks. For me, I'm just learning. And so as much as this is about me engaging in a conversation with you all, I'm also really hoping to just kind of listen and to hear and to participate throughout the day. All right, so with that said, two things I wanted to think about here, and is this idea of audacious hope and passionate action. What I want to suggest today is this idea that the things that are happening right now are ones that are really putting us in the thick of it. We are in this mess every day as educators, as researchers, scholars, people who are committed to public education. And so what will it take is what I want us to think about, and ultimately then what is to be done. So I want you to keep that in mind, these two notions of audacious hope and passionate action. The other thing that I wanted to say is that when I, as a researcher and educator and activist, what I want to suggest is really developing a kind of bifocal lens, right? So I don't know if there are any folks out there who wear bifocals, but the idea of being, looking at both the trees and the forest. And it's really hard as educators to really think about those things because you have 20 to 30, maybe more children, young people working in front of you. So, you kind of got to have your head buried in there. And so this is an opportunity to also step back and look kind of bifocally at what's happening, because what one of my teachers, Gene Anyon, the late Gene Anyon, suggested many years ago is that trying to reform education while ignoring all the other things that are happening in the social context is like trying to clean the screen door, trying to clean the air on one side of the screen door. And so I really take that to heart as something that we need to think about collectively in both kind of paying attention to both what's happening outside and then what's happening to the young people, and really that those things are deeply connected, right? What young people... Did I use my teacher voice? I don't think I could project that part. Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, I could try. Can y'all hear me? Yeah? All right. We'll talk over here. What was I talking about? Something about cleaning. Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing, right? What Gene Anyon was really trying to suggest is that all of us are implicated, and that we need to think about where we are doing our work, but not forget that wherever we are locally, right, whether we're at Central High or wherever school we're at, that the work is there and it's happening there, and that's your everyday. But all of that is happening within political, economic, racial, social injustices. And so we as educators need to think about how those things connect. I'm not saying, and I don't want to suggest in what I'm talking about today, and this is why I think a lot about audacious hope, is that I'm trying not to add more work to you, because I know y'all have plenty of ish to do. But what I want you to think about is how can we reframe our work, right? How can we redirect our work, our energies in ways that are sustainable, hopeful, and ultimately transformative, both for ourselves as well as young people and the communities that we work with. Am I still projecting okay? Yeah, all right. So when I say in the thick of it, I'm talking about two things. One is this idea that you all are in the thick of the everyday complexities of being an educator in the city of Philadelphia. And two, this idea of a thick kind of democracy. What would a different and alternative world, education system, city look like? And I want to suggest a few ideas here. All right. Yeah, all right. when I am thinking about the thick of it, and having these kind of bifocal lenses, what I really want us to think about is how do the things that are happening in the city, as the city has been going through tremendous and sometimes traumatic transitions, sometimes beneficial transitions, and what that has to do with the remaking of the schools. And what I've noticed here in these couple of years that I've been here in Philadelphia is there's this kind of, I've been calling it for the last 24 hours, this idea of turbo tinkering. There's like 45 different ideas, and we're going to tinker with them to try to steady this ship. But there's never an opportunity to actually let those things to marinate, to deepen, to be thought of as seeds rather than to be thought of as deep-seated systematic change. But just trying to continue to move the ship in a way and try to put these pieces together. And so that's really challenging, I think, for teachers. But when I look at this, what I think is important is really thinking first about the city, right? And understanding that the schools are part of that city. And they're, for many communities, the anchors of communities and neighborhoods. And so they're deeply connected. And so what's happening in the city is what I want us to just pay attention to first, and then think about and dig deep into what that looks like in community schools. Community-oriented kinds of schools, or community schools. And I'll distinguish between what I mean by those a little bit later. Can you get the next slide, Tom? All right. So, what are we facing? I don't know, you all tell me. What's up with Philadelphia? What's going on here? Any thoughts? Maybe one at a time so we can hear you all. Gentrification. Anything else?
Underpaid and overworked.
Underpaid, overworked. And that's not just teachers, right? We're talking about a lot of folks here, right? Unemployment tied to that. Under and unemployment.
Fair funding formula.
Fair funding formula, or lack thereof of fair funding formula.
Traumatized students.
Traumatized students. A dismantling of public education. Ooh, I like that one. Mm-hmm. Other things. Gerrymandered state legislature. You went for the polysyllabic word. I like that. So, but yes, definitely, right? So we've already started to map, in just this quick little brainstorm, we've started to map some of the political, economic, social issues. We didn't talk about segregation, right? How deeply segregated our city is, and what that means. And that's not something that just kind of happened recently. This is a long-standing process, right? And I want to suggest that a lot of these things, while we're experiencing them right now, are things that have been happening for decades, if not centuries. And so these are important kinds of ways of looking at the evolution and trajectory of things, and particularly with schools, right? Because schools have been part of those trajectories, sometimes in contradiction to what's happening to the city, but oftentimes in parallel or as a complement to what's happening in the city. And so there's this kind of dialectic experience of what happens in schools flows out, and what happens in the communities flows back right in. And so this is the work of teachers, this is your context, and how do we then make sense of it? And that's what it means for me to be, to suggest that we're in the thick of it. I just wanted to also include just a couple maps. So this is Philadelphia, and this is a census, a demographic, racial demographic map. Maybe some of you have seen it before. And so pointing to, particularly, so the blue are the white population, red and orange are, red is Asian American population, and orange are Latino populations, and then green is the Black community. And so you see it's very clear. There's these like huge blocks. And so tied to that is, I think the next slide, this is gentrification. So you'll see if I'd been real slick, I would have overlaid the maps, but I didn't have my act together that well this time, but I'll come back. This is just a description of different levels and intensity of gentrification. And so you see this kind of center city corridor, and then flowing into West Philadelphia, kinds of gentrification, kinds of levels of intensity, which is not to suggest that it's not happening in other areas, but it's in Philadelphia, what's interesting to see is how it's kind of flowing out from the center to the margins and then pushing and displacing. So what that means and what I want, oh, I'm sorry, and then last one, I promise. Oh no, I didn't include the maps, okay. There was another map that I had just around poverty levels, right? So as many of you know, and again, these are not things that are brand new, but I just wanted to put them into relief as things that we need to be thinking about, which are really difficult to think about when you're in the classroom and you're just trying to make sure that the children that you're working with are, and young people are working with are engaged, first of all, but then also developing academically, socially, what have you, and really thinking about their, and how that's tied ultimately to performance, at least in the current era that we're living in. So that's kind of what, what's happening outside, right? And so now what's happening in the classrooms? What's happening in schools? And a lot of you have pointed to some of those things already, right? I think the biggest thing here is funding. What is, and not that it's, there are different conversations in different cities, but what's happening in Philadelphia with funding and financing and resources for the school system is in some ways traumatizing and damaging, and in some ways making people vulnerable to continuing to spiral into into deep economic and social hardships. This has also been part of a state takeover, or we all have been experiencing a state takeover, the budget crisis, as I mentioned, losses of support, staff, people are disappearing. School closures have matriculated their ways and continue to operate through the expansion of charter schools, and what that means has had this tremendous implication for what's happening here. Before I come here, I come to a meeting at a professional conference, and someone had described what had happened with charter schools here about a decade ago as the Wild Wild West. And very much so, what I've seen is the challenges around regulating and maintaining some notion of accountability across schools. At the same time, the public schools have been, in many ways, experiencing this kind of severe disciplining kind of experience around the accountability, or notions of accountability. All right, so you know all these things. The question is, what do we do about it? And so maybe I think, next slide. So it brings us back to this age-old question of, well, what's to be done then? We've spent time thinking about these things, and the thing that I want to suggest is a kind of thick democratic approach to this. And interestingly, as we're talking on the day of electoral politics, or voting, and as I suggested a little while ago, there's this kind of misconception that democracy revolves around just voting, just doing your civic duty on this one particular day. And then the fact that the millennials are not voting and so, the young people are not involved is an indicator that they are not engaged, that they are not active. And so what I'm suggesting, and that for me is a conception of democracy and civic engagement that's very thin. And what I'm suggesting here is that in order to address what's happening in schools, starting in the classroom and moving all the way up to the city, is this kind of thick reframing of engagement, okay? And so I excuse me. There's been much work in Porto Alegre in Brazil around this idea of participatory kinds of government and administration, as well as reframing and rethinking and reorganizing the way human relationships and the society and the city runs. And so I want to suggest something similar for the city of Philadelphia and for the work that we're doing in our classrooms. Some of the research, Gandine and Apple are scholars that have been looking at this in Porto Alegre, and one of the things that they talk about is this idea of active citizenry. And for them, it's creating that. One that a kind of active citizenry is where one learns from its own. Citizenry learns from its own experiences and culture, not just for now, but for the future. And so I think that's part of what is sometimes missing in trying to figure out what's happening or what's happening to our city and some of the damage that has been wreaked. Part of that is this idea of really focusing on individualizing things and seeing this kind of very personalized approach to learning and to engagement that neglects our kind of communal practices, right? So we're looking at, and we often see that with just this idea of choice, or thinking about individual family choices, individual parental choices. Mark Zuckerberg is really talking about, is on the bandwagon around personalized learning and the power of digital technologies. And what a lot of that kind of talk does is really starts to ignore the very central aspect of community life. And so I think here, I'm trying to flip that on its head, right? And this is not to suggest that there was necessarily a good old days, because I think we also need to be very transparent about some of the problems of the past, and part of the way that what was happening in the past allowed what's happening now to take place, right? To be ramped up. But to think about what this could potentially look like. So, the community school strategy is just one example of an approach, and I want to touch on some of these. Again, I'm not trying to, although we'll be doing a workshop on community schools specifically in the first session, and if people want to continue that conversation, you'd be more than welcome to join us. But what I think the community schools approach suggests, or can suggest, is this idea of kind of thick democracy. And so what does this mean for educators? First, I think it's a reframing of our work. And part of that is that we're not just dispensers of information or behavior management devices, but rather that you are and that we are professional community workers. That we are in community every single day in the neighborhoods, and that we're also professionals, right? It's not you all have gone to too much school and done too many PDs to suggest otherwise. But that's the framing that people are trying to project, is that you're replaceable, or that you have the easy job because you have summers off and so on, when in fact, you're well-trained professionals who are doing really important work that doesn't get acknowledged. So what that means then as community professionals or professional community workers is that your voices are not only leaders in the classroom, but leaders in your school and in the neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods. Being able to think then about the different aspects of your work in ways that are connected. So part of that might be thinking about the curriculum and reframing the curriculum. A lot of what I've seen in different places, both here and in New York and in other areas where I've done research, is that, there's a phone going on, yeah. Good tunes. that the curriculum is this kind of neutral, just bit of knowledge, that a sets of knowledge or pieces of information that we need to then dispense. And what I'm trying to suggest here in the community approach is that, one, that at the center of curriculum are the lived experiences of young people and you as teachers. What drives and is at the heart of that, I think, is what should be moving curriculum forward, which is very different and runs contradictory, I understand, to what gets tested. And so in saying that, though, I'm not suggesting that we no longer stop teaching reading and writing and math, but that we rethink what is underpinning all of that work. How do we integrate, or how do we think about those different kinds of skills in ways that are useful and meaningful to young people and their families, that is relevant but also expansive, right? So you're teaching a kind of bifocal perspective as well, because you want, from this approach, you want to think about encouraging young people to look at what they have around them, what are the assets, but also thinking about what are the deficiencies in their communities, and then thinking about not disciplining that or shaming or feeling ashamed, but understanding that, okay, there's work to be done, and so we have, we as educators and young people together need to be thinking about what would be the alternatives, what kind of work is necessary for us to both learn as well as have an impact on the development of ourselves and the community that surrounds us. Another aspect to that is just reimagining how students are then actors in the classroom. A lot of the things that we think about from a community approach are around the relationships that one has with students, as well as the relationships we have with administration, neighborhood parents, as well as the district kind of power structure. What is our relationship to those things? How do we build relationships there? And so I think part of it is starting with the students and modeling for them what it is to be engaged in this way. A lot of what we do, not by intention, I think, but by design in terms of what we've been asked to do, often teaches these unspoken kind of hidden lessons about what it is to be engaged and what it is to be a student. And so you get a lot of this kind of resistance when there's actually really wonderful opportunities to engage. And so we really need to think about how are we going to move this forward in the work that we're doing with young people every day. So I actually wanted to ask, how are we doing on time? Just a few minutes? Okay. 10 minutes, okay. So I did want to do this one, and I wanted to focus on the classroom because I think this is the one that we have the most control over. And I think the other ones I want to come back to, but I want us to use the classroom as a foundation. That the classroom and the work that we're doing in there is a foundation for some of these others. So I did want to ask you all, so what are some ways, and I think part of the workshop, the slew of workshops that we have offered today, I think get at that, but what are some ways that we, in your classroom, that you try to flip the script around how young people are viewed? Over there.
children opportunity to learn, and we give our children opportunity to explore things that are interesting.
All right. Thank you. So I think that's we're a little short on time, but I think it's a key example, and I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry. Miss Janice Francis? Thank you, Miss Francis. So I think her example is really illustrative of the point that I want to make, which is one that it starts with reframing our relationships. How we view young people, I think is critical to creating a healthy kind of environment in the classroom. But and I want to suggest that beyond that, though, that the good work that you're doing in reframing that kind of relationship has to start seeping out into other classrooms, into school communities. The default position, what I've found and what I've researched, is that young people, as well as teachers, are seen in a deficit. That we're lacking, that we're lazy, that we don't care about our education, if it's for young people, or that we're sitting in the back reading the newspaper. And so these are old stereotypes and misconceptions that keep getting rehashed and recycled and remixed into current policy debate and our teacher training and the way we get viewed in the work that we're doing. And so really thinking about how can we reframe that is another piece that I want us to think about. The other parts that I wanted to speak about, and just really briefly, is just the importance of reimagining then and using that as a foundation. That we need to reimagine what it is our relationships are to these other institutions and entities. So part of that is, again, I think, our relationships to families and community. And the research that I've been doing here in Philadelphia, one of the recurring messages is that, and this, in some of the schools that I've been doing this research, there are communities that are in transition. And by that I mean transition in terms of gentrification. And so the actual population of the school is changing. Where it had been, predominantly majority, if not completely, Title I or low income in terms of population, as well as only of color, we're seeing changes in some of the neighborhood schools. And in doing to a small but growing population of white and middle class, maybe upper middle class community members as well, also going into the school. And what I found in that research is that there's this kind of two-tiered approach to parental engagement that schools seem to be practicing. And part of that is trying to really deal with two worlds, and schools being this kind of contact zone in places where we had been kind of barbed wired off from each other. And so what we're seeing then is this kind of different catering to the parents that are perhaps wealthier or have more kind of capital as their kind of cachet as they're coming in. At the same time, the parents and families that had been there for years and years and years are withering on the vine. And so it's this kind of, their parents are feeling ignored. They feel that their needs, that they're not welcomed at the school, and that those things are messages to them about who they are, who their families, and who the young people are at the school. They love the school. They love the education that their child has received, but they also feel that. And it's this kind of feeling that we as educators are really pivotal, I think, in trying to bridge. And so really focusing on the kind of strategies that we use to engage with parents and families. And I'm going to add, too, that engagement also needs to be looking at the assets that the neighborhoods and communities offer. Oftentimes, we're living in a moment where the focus has been solely on parent and parental choice, and the voice of parents in a certain kind of, in a specific way. And so that's done two things. One, it's done this kind of ignoring of the diversity of parents and the diversity of needs, as I just mentioned. But it also means that it has boxed out community organizations that have been very active and are vital to those very same parents that we are ignoring and marginalizing. And so as teachers, again, I don't want to put the work solely on your shoulders, but I think to be a voice in that work, both in the curriculum and thinking about how the curriculum will allow those voices to seep right back in as a central thing, but then thinking about how your voice is part of the work that the schools do, your schools do as institutions in engaging those communities. Okay. Couple things that last two things that I'll end with here as we start to move into the workshops. Three things. One is accountability. So reframing what it means to be accountable, I think is critical here. We've been in a moment where we've seen the ramping up of testing. We've also seen the ramping up of an opt-out movement. And so there's movements to refuse or to resist, which I understand is not for everyone, but to have the option as a viable option to be well informed, I think around testing should also be used as a model to think about accountability in general. And from a community approach, really thinking about being accountable, or the first question to think about is accountable to whom? And right now, we're accountable to test scores in many ways. And a community approach is suggesting that we're actually accountable to the community itself. We as teachers, as professionals, and the work that we're doing. And then thinking about the city, that we're accountable to the health and well-being of the city in the work that we're doing in the classrooms, is what I'm suggesting. The second thing I wanted us to think about is the persistence of race as a dividing issue here in the city. What is it for us to really engage in those conversations? And again, to bring it back to accountable, how can we hold each other accountable in having these really difficult conversations? I look out in the audience, and you're all a very beautiful, diverse bunch of folks. Phenotypically speaking. But how do we dig deeper? What are the questions there? Our schools are not set up currently to actually address and facilitate those conversations. And they're the ones that are much deeper in and historical in shaping our relationships between schools and communities. And so I want to suggest that a community schools or a community-oriented approach would also think about not just talking about race, but having real talk about race. And that means having the difficult conversations that are often painful, and that are pushing us to, or sometimes to make us shudder in thinking about, and realizing and doing a lot of self-reflecting. And what I want us to think about is how can we have these difficult conversations, what kinds of language do we need, and how can we move that forward? And then again, bringing it back to the curriculum and the work that we do with community and surrounding neighborhoods is shifting our lens and our approach in all of those kinds of things. And then finally, the thing that I wanted to close with is this idea of dignity. How do we, as educators, maintain our dignity and our dignity as human beings in a time where the attack has been very real and teachers have been vilified? And what I want to end on us thinking about is these kinds of meetings and gatherings are ways that I hope we can use as a restorative moment. that we are able to restore our humanity, restore our dignity as professionals, and seeing ourselves then ultimately as community workers. That's the important work, and the thing that I wanted to end with here. And I want you to think about this throughout the day when you're engaging with other people. Excuse me. And moving forward, sorry. Moving forward with that at the center of the curriculum development, the policy work that teachers, I think, should be a part of, and using that to then materialize it in the work that you do with your students and helping them to maintain their own human dignity. So thanks again for your time, and enjoy the day.